Achtung, Achtung, hello and welcome to We Have Ways of Making You Talk with me, Al Murray.
And me, James Holland.
Now, I'm a comedian who likes a bit of history, and James is a historian. Well, he's done quite a lot of telly, actually.
And what we not very funny.
Well, no, I didn't want to go there, but I wouldn't open with that. And what we like to do is talk about the Second World War, don't we, James?
Yeah, we like to. It's banter, really, isn't it? But informed banter.
Informed banter. And what we like to do is pick up a subject, run with it, see where it takes us, and we're open to people sending in their suggestions for questions, their corrections, their disagreements, and we are happy to be corrected some of the time. Isn't that right, James?
I think we are, and we're also happy to have strong opinions, aren't we?
Yeah.
And actually, we've had a question, haven't we, saying Churchill on the one hand, Hitler on the other. Was there a kind of grudging respect between the two? I think the short answer to that is no. Not at all.
Well, because the really interesting thing is that Churchill, after all, sets himself out in the late 30s politically, saying, "Watch out for this guy."
Yeah,
and has the measure of Nazism, has the measure of German aims, and I don't know if he'd read Mein Kampf, because not very many people outside Germany have.
Well, you can try, but it will send you to sleep. That's the problem.
Well, no,
so he might have had a go at it.
It's dreadful. I'm pretty sure I think he had. If he'd not read it, then he knew what was in it.
Yes,
and so he had a pretty good grip on Hitler, and certainly as the war then runs, he very much sees him as someone to be defeated. He also mocks him a great deal, calls him the corporal and all that sort of thing.
Yeah,
of course, the Allies' greatest military asset is that the corporal's in charge and not a general, and all this sort of.
Yeah, to be fair, they've got a bit of a point on that.
Yeah, it's absolutely right, isn't it? But beyond that, he didn't have any respect for Hitler, and he didn't. What he thought of him was that the guy was an implacable enemy that had to be defeated.
Completely. He set it up as a moral crusade, didn't he?
Yeah, indeed. And obviously, one of the things he was doing in the late 30s was creating political space for himself, because after all, you can never forget how ambitious Churchill was and how ambitious was...
But at the same time, that is driven by this belief that he is the one man that can... point this out because no one else is listening.
Yeah.
Everyone else is sort of going la la la. Yeah, we want to appease, and Churchill's going, no, you've got to wake up and smell the coffee. This guy's dangerous. This is where it's heading. You better stop him now.
Yeah.
And I think it's when you feel really strongly about something, you're very keen to let anyone who will listen hear it.
Which was a trademark of his political career in the 30s anyway, because he sided with the king during the abdication crisis.
Yeah.
He was a very, very strong advocate for not letting India gain any independence at all, and was a very, very staunch imperialist in that respect. So that he then gets into anti-Hitlerism, as it were, in the late 30s. It's quite an interesting place for him to end up politically, given his career.
And it's also one of the reasons why it takes quite a long time for him to actually get back into the heart of the political fold, because actually he seemed to have a kind of pretty dodgy record in terms of political judgment, and going further back beyond the abdication crisis and India and Home Rule and all the rest of it. There's also his time as Chancellor when he was, the time of the general strike in 1926. Then you've got
trying to get back on the gold standard and all that sort of thing.
Then you've got the Dardanelles. That wasn't great when he was,
So he was kind of shop soiled by 1940s. The thing but when he comes back to the Admiralty in 1939, he's sort of damaged goods politically. Certainly.
Yes, and when he becomes Prime Minister on the 10th of May, most people want it to be Lord Halifax, because Lord Halifax is seen as this incredibly safe pair of hands, someone you can trust, someone who's going to keep his head, who's going to be
John Major.
Yeah, a bit. But... and Churchill is seen as the drunk who's kind of sort of, eating truffles in one hand, sipping champagne in the other, and smoking a cigar. But and unreliable. But actually the opposite.
Yes, but therefore politically not a bad choice to give someone the job when you think you may have lost the war. Because he has to. If it all goes to shit, he's got to carry the can, which was part of the thinking. Surely, amongst some Tory politicians who are able to.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
But the thing is, interestingly, that's kind of what Hitler thought of Churchill, was that he was dissolute.
Yep.
That he was a puppet. Obviously, because the thing is with Hitler, absolutely everything you've got. He's like it's like a mincer. Whatever it is, you've got to feed the subject into Hitler's worldview and crank it, and it comes out the other end that basically he's a puppet of the Jews and a Bolshevist.
All that. But I think, what is true to say is that Hitler definitely has more than a grudging respect for Britain.
Yeah.
For Britain's empire, for his favourite film is Lives of a Bengal Lancer, for example. And he sees Britain as the most dangerous enemy in 1939. And all the rhetoric in that run up to the outbreak of war in September 1939, what he's always talking about, actually he doesn't talk about Britain, he talks about England, but he also says, England is our number one enemy. But there is this respect for it, respect for the empire, respect for their traditions, respect for what they've achieved. And
because he fancies a piece of that kind of action, doesn't he?
Yeah, of course he does. Yeah, he wants his own empire. He wants his own kind of sense of kind of sort of place in the world that Britain has. And it's very easy in the second decade of the 21st century to see Britain as this sort of much diminished place, and little Britain. But in 1939, it is the world's leading superpower. It has the largest empire the world has ever seen. It's got the largest navy,
which had got bigger as a result of the First World War. Is the other thing.
Exactly.
So which shows that if you're of the mind that when you want to get what you want out of the world, you do it by having wars. You know what I mean? Hitler can look at that.
There are some lessons there.
Exactly. The British Empire got bigger after the First World War, but mainly by snaffling up German possessions. But it had only happened 20 years previously. That exact thing.
In terms of character, I mean, they both love art. They love architecture. He's a painter. Churchill's a painter. Does it in his spare time. Hitler tried to become a professional painter. Churchill, in my humble opinion, is much better.
And they're both autodidacts as well, because after all, Churchill did very badly at school and sort of had to build himself an intellect after his time in the army, and during the army and then after the army, and sort of create himself in that respect. And Hitler's arguably not that different. It's just the stuff he was reading was
slightly on a
different level.
They've both written books. They're both published authors.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, they nearly meet while Churchill is preparing his Life of Marlborough.
Because he was a historian, so I mean, we could have had him on as
he's a historian, writer,
as a guest, couldn't we?
Speaking peoples, all the rest of it.
But I mean, the thing is,
would that have been?
I mean, it would be extraordinary. I mean, in all sorts of ways. I mean, we'd have had to invent a time machine. So I think we'd be wasting our time with the podcast if we'd invented a time machine, James. Anyway, the point is, the thing is, though, they also run things very differently. I mean, whatever they think of each other. Hitler has this system where he's sort of like the fairy on top of the Christmas tree, and then there's all these other people all competing with each other. Whereas Churchill is answerable to his chiefs of staff, he's answerable to his cabinet, and he's looking at the thing in a much more collegiate way. I think is that fair? That's fair to say, isn't it?
I think it is much more collegiate, but there's no question that he's boss, and there's also no question that during the Second World War, he's running roughshod over the normal kind of parliamentary democracy. He's just sort of making huge decisions without sort of consulting the nation, without consulting much of Parliament, even without consulting even his wider cabinet. I mean, the War Cabinet is only 5 man strong. And but that's not to say he's being dictatorial in any shape or form. He's certainly not. Major dissimilarities in their personality as well. Well, let's talk about similarities. They both like staying up late.
Yeah.
They both like have a little bit of a line in the morning.
Yeah.
They both like spouting forth.
Yeah.
Churchill tends not to go on for 2 hours and rain everyone with spittle and bad breath.
Yeah. They're both into bright ideas, aren't they?
They're both into bright ideas. They love modernity. They love invention. Anything new and shiny. They're kind of like magpies like that. They love all that kind of stuff. Hitler is vegetarian, doesn't smoke, doesn't really drink either.
Yeah.
Churchill smokes his massive stogies. He eats literally everything.
Champagne for breakfast.
Yeah, champagne for breakfast. Absolutely gets through a bottle of white, a bottle of, drinks brandy, red wine. There's a sort of amazing description by Oliver Littleton, who becomes Lord Chandos, who ends up being Minister of Supply. And he's sort of going, a dinner with Winston is just absolutely extraordinary because on the one hand, he's taking a mouthful of steak and kidney pudding. In another hand, he's got a chocolate truffle. There's a kind of gulp of champagne, then a gulp of claret, then a kind of draw on his cigar. All the time, he never seems to stop talking. So you're not quite sure how he's managed to do all these things at the same time. There is this sort of incredible sense of absolute extraordinary energy. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about Hitler is as the war progresses, his energy levels just kind of go...
He sort of dims like a bulb, doesn't he?
Yeah. they both suffer from ill health. His made worse by kind of the incredible cocktail of drugs he's having at the end of the war. But Churchill nearly dies in the end of the war.
Heart attack in North Africa.
Yeah, and gets pneumonia.
Yeah.
That's a killer.
Yeah.
But he gets through that. I mean, he spends the amount of trips he does on airplanes, which in the 1940s is just unbelievably dangerous.
Yeah.
Just going on an aircraft, let alone one in a war zone, is absolutely extraordinary. Hitler is also a massive advocate of air power, and in the 1932-33 elections, he uses it to get around more. So that's absolutely in keeping.
But disappears from view by the end of the war. No one's seen him publicly for a very long time at the end, and he stops broadcasting as well. He gets other people to do it for him and all that sort of thing, doesn't he? Yeah. Whereas Churchill remains kind of front and centre.
Absolutely.
But I digressed us, and that happens often on this, by the way. They nearly met. 1932, they were going to meet, weren't they? Because Churchill was researching a book about Marlborough, and they were going to meet for tea.
Yes, and he was going to see the battlefield of Blenheim.
That's right.
Which is not a million miles from Munich. So he was staying in Munich, and he got in contact with Hitler's people, and they had arranged to meet for tea. And Hitler didn't turn up.
You see, because what... One wonders what difference it would have made if they had met. Because after all, Hitler was famous for casting a spell over people. Fuhrer attacked. The whole idea that the touch the Fuhrer, and once you're in his spell, and so you have all these descriptions of people meeting Hitler, where they either like get it and he gets them and he draws them in, or they sort of, you get lots of descriptions of people standing aside. What on earth did anyone see in this funny little weird little scratchy man with a strange voice and the terrible speeches, because if you weren't into his oratory,
and even worse halitosis.
Exactly. Such bad halitosis. I mean, during the invasion of Poland, he did a front-line trip, and his halitosis was so bad that people basically couldn't bear to be around him.
Just needed a pack of extra Strongmans,
but had to be because he was the Fuhrer. Exactly. Packet of extra Strongmans.
But you're absolutely right. I mean, he did reduce people. I mean, what is really interesting is Hitler doesn't go around executing his generals. He's not like Stalin, where you say the wrong thing, and when you leave the room, that's the last room you ever leave.
Yeah.
He doesn't do that. He sacks generals, but he very, very rarely puts them to death. I mean, only after the kind of failed assassination attempt in 1944. And yet, despite this, he does reduce people to quivering wrecks.
Yeah.
I mean, von Scholtitz, von Brachitsch, who is the commander-in-chief of the army at the start of the war, for example. He goes in to meet Hitler several times going, right, I'm going to stand up for myself, I'm going to stand up for the leaders of the army, and I'm going to just tell him straight. Yeah. And he comes back sort of, shaking.
But he kind of had two methods, didn't he? Because he could be incredibly charming, look you right in the eye with his penetrating gaze, as it were, or he'd chew the carpet and yell at you until you gave into it. And he kind of had two modes. I mean, interestingly, it probably illustrates the difference between the Nazi state and the Stalinist state is that Stalin actually, his grip on things was even tighter. And the party's grip was even tighter. And everything was subservient to the party. The army, absolutely everything was beneath the party. Whereas what you've got in Germany through the 30s into the 40s is the party bumping alongside existing institutions and every now and again trying to swallow them and sometimes failing and then creating its own ones to sort of compete with it, rather than being the overall umbrella organisation, which is what you have in the Soviet Union. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say.
Yeah.
But you're right, because there was a moment where Admiral Horthy turns up from Hungary.
Yeah.
And it's March 1944, and Hitler's going, you've got all these Jews, we've got to get rid of them. And Horthy's going, well, don't you threaten me, and all this kind of stuff. And he goes, I know you've been doing peace feelers, putting out peace feelers to the Allies. You can forget that. We're going to, you disagree with me, and we'll just invade the whole country, we'll occupy you, and we'll still get rid of your Jews. So just get on it. And Horthy and him have this massive Barney, and Horthy storms out, and Hitler follows him down into another room, and eventually persuades him.
Jesus.
And as a result of that, 460,000 Jews meet their death that summer.
But a British politician who did meet Hitler, of course, Chamberlain, who felt, I mean, obviously he went to see Hitler because he felt he had, I mean, there's this famous quote that says, I felt we could do business with him. Yeah. Like, he had to do business with him, was the way he saw it. So
that's real politics.
So of course he thought that. And but it's interesting that he came away convinced that there could be a deal to be done, and that you know, in Munich, in many ways, in Munich, no deal was a deal was better than that deal or whatever. And all that. But there was all he did meet him, and he did feel he persuaded him. He did feel he'd made a connection with him, and he did feel that they were talking as rational actors.
There's also a sense that in Munich, those talks in Munich, that actually Chamberlain massively outmaneuvers Hitler. Because Hitler's absolutely spoiling to get unleashed in Czechoslovakia and go for war. He wants to unleash his war machine. And the negotiations stop that.
Yeah.
And he's completely wrong-footed by the kind of little bit of paper, the pledge, which he does mano a mano in Hitler's flat, if I remember rightly. You know, it's absolutely extraordinary, really. I mean, I don't think Chamberlain is the kind of sort of figure of ridicule and mockery that he's so often been.
Well, and then things repeat themselves in August of '39, when the British look like they are going to use Poland as a tripwire base, which is what they do.
Yeah.
And the German and Hitler again is like, oh, they're going to spoil my fun.
Yeah. This time, you know,
I want a war. I want to do this, and they're going to stop me. And in the end, what he doesn't do is give in to pressure from the British, which is what he does in Munich. It actually gives in to British pressure.
Yeah.
It's actually that way. It is that way around,
yes,
which is what's really, really interesting about it.
Even though Chamberlain sold him out, and the French sold out the Czechs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
they have. So it's not a finest moment.
No. They gave in to British pressure, and the price of British pressure was selling out the Czechs. Exactly. I mean,
but just go back to Hitler and Churchill. I think the one really crucial area where they are massively different is that Churchill, by 1939, has this absolutely terrific geopolitical understanding.
Yep.
I mean, this is a man who has militarily fought on 4 different continents.
Yep.
You know, this is a man who's been all the senior positions of state. He's travelled the world. He speaks different languages. He's read and read and read.
He's a historian. He's a European historian.
So he gets how Europe, he gets how the world operates. He's used the extent of the British Empire and Britain's global trading empire to kind of learn more about how the world works. Hitler, on the other hand, has this incredibly myopic, narrow geopolitical understanding. That is his fatal flaw.
And lives in a fantasy world.
I think we sorted it out. They didn't like each other and they were quite different.
Thanks very much. I'm Al Murray.
I'm James Holland.
Cheerio. See you again.